This is Fearless Careerist with Dr. Catherine Robert. On this episode, Catherine speaks with Dr. Jeanne Gerlach, Dean Emeritus at the University of Texas at Arlington, about how she championed women leaders in education, her own leadership experiences, and how she continues to promote women's leadership opportunities.
I think as I reflect that you have to open the doors yourself. You have to think about, just like in the council with the women, how can I showcase these women? And how can I bring what women were doing and are doing now into the limelight? And so we wrote the book.
Here's Catherine Robert.
Dr. Jeanne Gerlach joins me on Fearless Careerist today to not only share her path to becoming a college dean, but to talk about her work with several professional organizations that have profoundly impacted the working lives of those they serve. Dr. Gerlach is the co-author of the first book to talk about female pioneers of English education. She has numerous awards, including being inducted into the Colleges of Applied Human Sciences, and is Dean Emeritus of the University of Texas at Arlington. Since retiring from active faculty, Dr. Gerlach has continued her service on the board for both Leadership Women and Texas Women in Higher Education. Jeanne joins us here today to share her path from writing obituaries for a local newspaper to college professor and administrator to her groundbreaking work in policy, founding the College of Education at UTA, building partnerships for strengthening teacher certification pathways, and advocating for women and multicultural representation in educational spaces. Welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I know that introduction didn't come close to fully representing the work you've done. It was a challenge to decide how to condense your work for the podcast. And note to our listeners, we'll hear some of Dr. Gerlach's research, but we won't even do her research justice today, since we're mainly covering career decisions in the service for professional organizations. You grew up in West Virginia, attended college there, majoring in journalism. What led you to move from your first role writing obituaries to becoming an English professor?
Well, Catherine, it's a really winding path. I knew two things when I graduated from high school. One, I didn't want to be a teacher. And two, I sure didn't want to be a nurse. I thought, well, I'd major in journalism. That was fairly risque for the time. In the late 60s, early 70s, women were still doing teaching, nursing, and secretarial positions. And those are great positions. It just didn't seem that we were encouraged to do much else. Out of a graduating class of close to 600, we had one woman who became a medical doctor. That was pretty rare at the time, and also rare for women to go to law school. Thank goodness that's changed. The jobs that I could get when I was in school and working were things like writing obituaries or sometimes doing a little bit with the features pages. I was married soon after I was finished, and my husband I knew that he was going to be in a job that was going to move him around the country a good bit. I thought, well, what could I do? How could I use what I have and have a job? Because I was one of those women who I really didn't like staying home very much. I knew that I was going to want to work. I thought, well, I could teach. I took the coursework that I already had, which was in drama, speech, journalism, and English, and parlayed it into that language arts degree. I went back to West Virginia State and picked up those classes that it would take for me to be certified to teach in all those fields at the undergraduate level. It was such fun. I had such a great time. I thought, wow, maybe this is what I really want to do, is to teach in higher ed. And so that I put in the back of my head because it would take me a long time to get there. Then I started teaching at the junior high level. There was a teacher who wanted to go to Paris for the spring break, and she couldn't go unless she had someone to cover her classes.
Right.
And she taught English and all of those drama, speech, and journalism, but she also taught French. Well, they wanted me to do it, and I'd never had any French. I had Latin. I had Spanish, and I thought, I can't do this. I just can't do this. And then I thought, why can't I do it? I could stay ahead of those kids. And that's pretty much what I did. I took the position, and I was on my own. And so I stayed up many nights, late nights, learning what they were doing, the same thing they were doing. And some of them really helped me out. But she was only gone for a couple weeks. But when she came back, they decided to hire me for the rest of the semester. And so that's really how I got into teaching.
Awesome. Awesome. You moved quickly through graduate work, and then you had your first exposure to the National Council of Teachers of English while you were a doctoral student, right?
Right. Did graduate work. And I was able, I might say this too, particularly women. I hear so many women talking to me about not being able to afford to go to school. And because I was living in state and I was going to West Virginia University, which is a state school, the state paid my tuition. I had all my tuition was paid, my master's work. At that time, when I was working on my master's level, and then doctoral level, I had professors who were really active in the National Council of Teachers of English. They introduced me to the council. I believe it was 1981 was the first national conference that I ever went to. I remember the president of the council gave this speech, and he was talking about how important history was and how important history was when it was tied with leadership. He said, if we had good leaders who knew our history, we wouldn't make so many asinine mistakes today. And I'll never forget that. I've really never thought much about the history and how it's helping us in the future.
Yeah.
So I did, and did look to learning about the history of the council, and I had read all their journals. NCTE came about in 1911, and it really grew as a sort of a little bit before the secondary schools,
Right.
1917 movement, and we needed to move away from college entrance requirements, writing, and not much focus on anything else. If you go back and look at the history, that's where a lot of movement away from college entrance exams was going on. I learned everything I could about the history. I was really very interested in women leaders. Remember, I said 1911, the council originated.
Right.
And, but it was till 1929 that they had a woman president. Those women were around, hovering around like everywhere else, leadership and what was going on, but never the president. And so I was listening to a tape by a man by the name of Wilbur Hatfield. Wilbur had been one of the founders of the council and long-term secretary of the council. He also began the English Journal, which is such a popular journal even still. But they asked him, they said, well, the woman, Ruy Bell Inglis, she was the first president. What did you think about all that? He said, well, I didn't know. He said, you look at a face and you see a pretty face and you wonder how much is the face and how much is something else. What did he just say? I just couldn't believe that this was in 1963, he was giving this interview. And he said, the tape went on a little bit, but I was wrong. She was the best leader we ever had internally for the council. So he kind of corrected himself. But at the same time that I was doing that, a woman by the name of Virginia Monceau was at Michigan State, and she was in the same kind of history classes.
Mm-hmm.
And she had gotten really curious about what was going on in the council, and she heard much of the same rhetoric. She and I were working on the Women's Committee of the National Council of Teachers of English. That brought us together. We've worked together throughout our lives, and we wrote. That's what brought us to writing Missing Chapters, English Women Women in English Education. There had never been anything written about these women, nothing. We worked very hard, and it was very challenging to get the publishers to accept a book on women, even in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
So I think for me, oftentimes I didn't necessarily plan where I was going, but pathways opened up, and I was able to take what I was interested in and fit it into what was being provided for me, or a door opened for me. I think as I reflect that you have to open the doors yourself. You have to think about, just like in the council with the women, how can I showcase these women? And how can I bring what women were doing and are doing now into the limelight? And so we wrote the book, but we talked. We went to all kinds of conferences, talked about the women. Everybody knew what we were doing. We formed a women's committee, and I was the chair of the committee for about 10 years, and we began a journal. And so we had an edited journal. It was sponsored by the council. And then I became, after the women's committee, I was chair of the committee on history of the council. I was able to begin to provide other things for the council to consider than just the straight chronological recounting of the
Right.
work. But there was not a woman who was the executive director of the council until in the 70s, 80s. All
Mhm.
that time, it was always a man. And they were good leaders.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with the leaders, but they're just it just wasn't considered for many reasons. I think we have to think about as women, what do we want? And, if we have families, what are we willing to give up, or what are we willing to try to balance for leadership roles? If you have children at home, do you have someone that could help you take care of them if you're going to conferences, if your work demands that you're traveling? And so it's always something that I think you have to pause along the way and think about.
Mhm.
How is this going to shape my life? How am I going to shape others' lives? But how will this shape my life? And will it work for me?
Right. Right. These connections that you made through the NCTE helped foster your critical connection to women's studies and to people that you worked with throughout your whole career, right?
Yes, and when I was really becoming active in NCTE, I was, as you pointed out, also taking graduate classes, and one of the professors was a woman by the name of Judith Stitzel, and she taught English, but she also taught women's studies. She
Mhm.
came out of University of Wisconsin, and she would have these women's salons on Sunday afternoon. We all remember reading about the salons in Paris and Europe. I was so delighted to be invited to those.
Mhm.
We would go, and there would be maybe wine or and coffee or different kinds of snacks to eat. And people literally sat around all afternoon talking about women's roles and what we needed to do. I met so many dynamic women who
Mhm.
many were English educators and many were working for the council as well. It became a really pretty tight knit group. And it was just really quite informative for me. I really watched Judith begin the Center for Women's Studies at West Virginia University. She grew that, and it was just such an interdisciplinary effort across the campus. There were people
Mhm.
all over the campus, including the med school, engineering, who became part of the women's studies program. And I had such a wonderful way of meeting and connecting to people in other fields through that activity. I decided maybe I should teach women's studies, and so I did. I taught a course in women's studies, and it went really well.
Let me jump to Mill Creek then. You
Okay.
due to your husband's job, your family ended up moving several times while you were essentially an assistant professor. Did you have trouble finding a comparable job when you moved each time?
Well, I did. It's challenging. He was a regional vice president. At that
Mhm.
level, they would give so much money for me to find to use
Oh,
headhunters or,
nice.
people to find jobs. But
Yeah,
you really couldn't do that with higher education.
sure. I mean, there
And
either is a job or there isn't, right?
right. And
Especially
I had
given the time of
finished
year.
up that's right. I had finished up my coursework for my doctorate at the University of Washington. So I
Mhm.
had some connections that way. I wound up teaching in continuing ed at Seattle Pacific University. And what did that mean? It meant I was teaching English, teaching writing. I would drive to Edmonds, get on a
Mhm.
ferry, go for the ferry ride, get off and drive an hour to meet
Ah,
teachers.
yeah.
But it was a beautiful experience. There would be all these pine trees, beautiful
Mhm.
scenery. The women were so wonderful. They were so thrilled that I came. We would just do all kinds of fun things. People would bring food. That went on for 3 hours. Then I'd get in the car, drive back to get the ferry and ride across. It was just an exhilarating experience with
Yeah.
all the beauty, and you were alone, had time to think. So I loved it. It also meant that I had to plan carefully. 2 children by this time. I had to think about that because some of the time my husband was at home, some of the time he was traveling. I think I think often we as women have to do that. We talk about today work-life balance. I don't know if there's such a thing as work-life balance. But one time I did a study looking at women who were deans, what they considered success and what they considered survival. They're different. So many of them were quick to point out too that they came to the deanship when they were midlife after their children were grown. And then they stayed in the deanship, but most of them, I think it was 97% of them, didn't choose to move on because by that time they were having parents that they had to watch out for. So there was this caregiving tug that
Yeah.
we as women have to have. I think that as I talk to women today, they still have those same concerns.
Nonetheless, you did get an offer as be an administrator in West Virginia. So let's jump back to that.
Well, yes, I was working and I taught in several different places, as you've seen. West Virginia University needed an English educator to take over and direct the English education program.
Right.
The person who was there when I was there had left, and they had sort of had part-time people, and the program wasn't moving forward like it had been. One of my colleagues who I'd known at NCTE said to me one day, "Jeannie, won't you come back and take this position, build this program back up to where it was?" I liked that idea, but I thought, gee, well, I don't know how I can because my family was here, my husband's job was here, and I was thinking about going here. So I talked them into letting me come for a year and see if I could get things worked out. So I did, and I spent a year there. Then also, I was associate director of the National Writing Project. I got very involved in that. So we worked it out, and I did go back. And this was the time that my husband followed me.
It was his turn.
That's right. So
You mentioned you were active with NCTE, and a contact is what helped you get there. You were also active with the National Organization for Women, right?
yes, I was. I really began working with National Organization for Women with my experience with Judith Stitzel and all the work that was going on there. I think they call us the second round of veteran feminists. We were trying very hard to make for sure that women and girls were given opportunities that they needed. About that time, Myra and David Sadker wrote several books about, one's title was Why America's Schools Are Failing Our Girls, pointing out that in the classroom that women teachers, women or men teachers, tended to cater more to the men, the boys, than they did the girls. It's their work that was this seminal work, looking at how girls were treated in the classroom. And for example, they would see that even if young boys were obnoxious in the classroom, they still got more attention than the girls did.
Yeah.
And then we also knew that we didn't want women to not be encouraged. For example, when I was in school, I don't remember anyone saying anything to me about not doing something, but neither do I remember anyone saying, go into science. You're really good at science, Jeannie, or you're really good at math. Have you thought about this? As a matter, the only one time that I could remember being a little discouraged by a teacher was in my geometry class. The professor, and I don't know why you girls are in here. You just don't need to be. You'll never use this stuff. So that was kind of the way.
But fortunately, only once that you had encountered that.
And then, yes. No, it wasn't.
That was the only one that said it really directly, right?
Yes, that's the only one that said it really directly. I think I wasn't wise enough to know what was going on. I mean, my parents raised me to believe that I could do anything I wanted to, which was a good thing because I pretty much did. And it wasn't until I was working in master's level classes that I thought, this is not going as well as it could be. And I looked at textbooks. One of the papers I did once was looking at textbooks to see how women were portrayed in the textbooks kids used in school. And, I'd never thought anything about all that. And that's how I fell into reading all about the Sadker's work and National organization for women. That was about the time that Ms. Magazine came out. There were just so many things going on. When I went to the library after I was married to get a library card, they said, now, I filled out all the information. They said, now turn on the back and write your husband's name. And I said, what for? He said, well, that's just because we have to have it. So I left and I didn't get the library card, which, I thought, well, that was really dumb. Now I'm not how am I going to use this, but I thought this is crazy. I did a lot of volunteer work too. Women were expected to do volunteer work, and I was on the symphony auxiliary. When they published our names in the brochures for the symphony, I was never published Jeanne Gerlach. It was always Mrs. Roger. Well, gee, I have a name. I remember I would go with my husband to a lot of conferences, and I would hear all these men giving these talks. And that's really, I'll never forget when I was sitting in one of them, and I thought, wow, I could do that. I could do that even better than they could do that. And that's when I decided I'm going to do that. So,
Good for you.
but how do we help young girls and young women have those opportunities?
Right.
Well, I think so much. I really met people who were just so willing to mentor and help. And
you did so well in West Virginia in your early administrative days that you were thinking about an ACE fellowship, and they wanted you to stay because you would have had to leave for a year. So they structured something similar to a fellowship for you, right? You got to work with student affairs, multicultural education, budget and finance, and graduate education.
yes.
What was your biggest aha moment when working across all the different divisions and departments in a university?
Well, I was working with the provost of budget and finance. I was working with the dean of the graduate school on graduate education. I worked with provost for student affairs, and then with the provost, we really grew the multicultural curriculum. But my biggest aha moment was, I really think I would probably like to be a dean or a provost. Pretty much what I wanted to do because I loved the budget and finance work. And actually, when I did a second doctorate in leadership, and my minor was budget and finance. And I realized at the time too that everything depends on the money.
Sure.
You can be the most dedicated dean in the world, and if you have no money to help your faculty and your students, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And so I think that was maybe one thing that hit me pretty hard was I have to know more about this. And also the student affairs part, that was a very much of a eureka type moment to me, knowing I always liked the students. I just took so much time. I mean, I always believed very strongly that we were there for the students, regardless of what else. But spending a year with a person learning about student affairs was quite eye-opening. And it was just, to me, so important. I was happy to have been able to do that. It just was so energizing and important to have had that experience. And I'm sure that I might have had a similar or a very different experience had I gone through the ACE and gone elsewhere.
Right.
This was, for me, just what I needed at the time.
Right. When it was time to go back to your original role, they asked you to chair the Department of Educational Leadership. What made you say no?
Well, the dean, when I was coming back, she asked me if they were looking for a chair. They hadn't been successful. There was a lot of arguing and issues. I thought, I just don't have to take any job anymore. I had enough experience to know that something else would come along, and I'm not going to put myself in a position that would cause me grief. Just continual grief. I thought, okay, I'm not doing it. I got along really well with the dean, but she and I we didn't have any words about it, but we had a little parting of the waves for a while.
Yeah, nobody likes to be told no. And at this time, you were also thinking about the NCTE executive director, right?
I was. The executive director position came open, and I had been in the council for quite a number of years and had quite a few leadership roles. Lots of people encouraged me to apply. I felt like if I were executive director of the council, I would be pulling English education and educational leadership together. It would be a great opportunity for me to have the best of both my worlds.
Sure.
And It was about a year-long process, going through interviews. Everywhere you were for the council, you were on an interview, it seemed like, if you
Yeah.
were attending. I was in Heidelberg at a conference. I remember people there really, they were interviewing me there. So all over, and they sent people to the university to stay a week and to interview people across the university. It was a long, long time for
Yeah.
a job um, application.
Yeah,
application.
that's exhausting.
And so, in the end, there were three of us finalists, and in
Mhm.
the end, I did not get the position. Someone asked me, "How do you feel?" And I said to them, "I feel nothing." The song from Chorus Line. What? I don't think I was really sad. I really think I felt nothing, and
Yeah.
but I had no idea what I was going to do next,
Right.
and just I thought, I will just stop for a while because I'd done so many different things,
Yeah.
and, I thought, I'll just teach my classes and, take a little break from trying to combine administration with teaching. I thought, "Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be in such a hurry to get into administration, and we'll
Yeah.
just see what happens." So, it's what I did for about 2 months. This position at, the University of Texas at Arlington came about. The president was under the guidance of the chancellor to raise enrollment. So he hired me. And actually, I went there as director of the Center for Teacher Education, knowing that I was going to turn it into a school.
Right.
So that was in 97. I really found it was very challenging that when I got there, a lot of their programs weren't approved, courses weren't approved.
Oh, wow.
But I knew a lot of people in Austin in the legislature,
Well, that helps.
and I knew the new board chairman.
Yeah.
So I went to Austin, and the president, by the way, went with me, and he introduced me to everybody he could think of that could help me.
Right.
People helped me, and I remember one
Yeah.
man saying, "If you ever need anything, if you need anything to get anything through, just call me." I bet I called him 10 times. So it's about connecting with people, but it was
Yeah.
also being able to hire people and to look at people who were already in place and to think about what is their area? What can they do really well in?
Yeah.
And trusting that you're there to help, but you're not the smartest person in the room, and you
Yeah.
don't know everything about everything. I think once we give that up and we
Yeah.
think, "Let's see, I know a whole lot about English education, but I know I needed to build an early childhood program. I know
Right.
nothing about early childhood programs. So
Right.
who
Right.
could I find?" Well, here's this person I had on staff that ran a Montessori school
Wow.
that was one of the best early childhood educators in the state, and she said, "I sure like to do that." I said, "Great, go for it, but don't ask for any help from me except maybe money because I don't know much about it."
So
And
this is the hard part. How do you sum up more than 20 years of work at UTA in which you did found what became the College of Education? You
yes.
served on countless boards and committees, such as the State Board for Educator Certification, and built lasting relationships and programs with the surrounding school districts, very important to train teachers and administrators. So let's talk about what are the biggest highlights from that work?
Well, I think that it was certainly the president who hired me. The provost became such a good friend of my family, but I think for me, it was like, "This isn't mine, this is theirs, and how do I get them to take ownership of what I want to do?"
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
And that was what we did, and so we had so much help and so much support,
Yeah.
and, you know, I remember Bob Witt was the president. He's absolutely the best leader I ever worked for. I was never afraid to pretty much speak my mind, but
Right.
I wasn't a person who got up in people's face. The
Mhm.
provost, he would call me, Jeannie. He didn't
Mhm.
call me Jeannie, but when he called me Dean Gerlach, I knew something was up. And
Something
but he
official. Yeah.
but he said to me once, he said, "I love it when you come over here." He said, "We talk about research, we talk about teaching, we talk about what the needs are. You don't get up and scream and yell." And I said, "I can do that." I said, "Is that what you need for me to do?"
Did you need screaming here?
I can do that, but,
Oh.
I chose not to. That wasn't my personality. And another provost said to me, he said, "Oh," he said, "you're so quiet, I never know what you're thinking. I never know where your mind is." He said, "I'd hate like heck to play poker with you." And, um, you know, I certainly was forceful, and I laid out my needs and my
Mhm.
really faculty needs and desires, and I always knew that when I was there, I was representing faculty. And I think the hardest thing for me was I think my faculty now would tell you that I never came back and said, "Oh, the provost says we have to do this or we have to do that," or the president says. I just said, "These are the things that we've got to get done. And
Yeah.
let's figure out a way to make it work if we
Yeah.
can." And also there had been things that I knew decisions were made, and regardless of how much they didn't wanna do it, we were gonna do it. The hardest thing for me, I think, Catherine, was when I really knew that we were gonna have to implement online education to a point where some of faculty were pretty resistant at the time about moving to online.
Initially compromised quality. Certainly not true today, but the early attempts were.
Yeah. It was
Mhm.
that, UT System had one of the best telecampuses in the country. What that meant was that you could serve students, 24/7 if they needed help, if faculty needed help, it was there. I was always trying to listen, and I became tired sometimes, really
Sure.
tired,
Yeah.
but it grew, the college grew, and there was such a need. There was a lot of alternative cert programs
Mhm.
that I had to figure out. For me, rather than go up against them, I tried to figure out ways to work with them.
Yeah.
And I just simply thought that they're not going away.
Right.
And then I did a lot of work with, was on the State Board for Educator Certification,
Mhm.
and I was a teaching commissioner for a while, served on the Texas Business Education Coalition. So I did as much as I could, but initially, and I think as women who are moving into leadership, you have to figure out how much time do you spend internally and how much time do you spend externally.
Yeah. Yeah, because
And
it's a very public-facing role.
you have to do both, but you have to, I think, come to know the internal workings
Mhm.
first before
Mhm.
you can
Before you spread out.
spread
Yeah.
out.
As a prominent dean, that you had experience across most facets of the university. This made you a candidate for moving up. Were you recruited to apply for other leadership positions?
Yes, I was. I, was recruited for many, many provost positions and other dean positions. And toward the end of my career at UTA, I was recruited for 3 different presidencies. I looked at several of the positions, and I think what you have to do, again, when you're being recruited, you have to think about, are they recruiting me for my expertise and my leadership, or are they recruiting me because I'm a woman and I'll fill a quota?
Yeah.
And is this position I'm being recruited for something what?
Yeah.
Would it be something that would fit my needs and
Right.
and my hopes and desires, or what my plan might be?
Yeah.
Or do I have a plan? 55% of all PhDs are women, but for college presidents, only about 18%. Most of them are at 2-year colleges. Not that that's a good thing, but that's just a fact. And so you've still got a lot going on that you have to think about.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the job was very demanding between the and we haven't talked about it, but you did maintain your teaching and committee work throughout the entire time you were a dean. Do you feel like you made any trade-offs in your personal life in order to be a university administrator?
Well, yes and no. I think, and I didn't. I remember at one point, Krista was at a private girls' school in San Antonio, but she was a commuter. But when I went back to West Virginia, she had to become a boarding student. And she didn't like that very much. So I asked my kids, I said, would you have rather that I'd been an at-home mother? And then they say, oh, heavens, no. But they talked about the experiences they had probably because of my position, and they also admit that there were things that they wished had been maybe different. But my husband and I really tried to work out between us. I mean, we wound up commuting between WVU and Texas for 2 years. That's a hard thing to do.
As you received Dean Emeritus status, retiring in 2020, but you have continued your service to the profession. What organizations are you working for now?
Well, I am on the board of Leadership Women, which is a national group that's been around over 40 years that people like Ann Richards, the former governor of Texas, really put together. So many of us at that time were seeing women that had what it took, but they didn't have mentors and they didn't know how to get to where they wanted to be, or they didn't even know how to think about where they wanted to be. So this group formed, and they formed first as Leadership Texas. They would find women who were with all fields, and they would identify women who had who, given an opportunity, could make great leaders.
Mhm.
And so they gave them a year-long series of speakers, mentors, people who would become mentors.
So you got to meet amazing people. And then, if we're talking to someone today who is considering participating in this kind of program, what can we tell them to expect?
Well, I think that you not only get to meet amazing people, but you get to find out what the career opportunities are to get where you might want to be.
Right, because like
And
you said, you didn't know how to visualize a leadership role, right? So it
right.
shows you what it looks like, right?
It does show you what it looks like, and these women are out there for you,
Right.
and they will take your call. And what this does, what Leadership Women does, you experience a vast array of people from different
Mhm.
walks of life. You're just going to broaden your outlook.
Mhm.
Sometimes it feels we tend to narrow our focus,
Right.
sometimes too much. Leadership Women brings you together with people who have had similar but dissimilar experiences.
Great. What advice do you have for young professionals about finding organizations that they will find mutually beneficial?
I believe we have to seriously look at our field and
Right.
look at what the organizations are that serve your field.
And what should someone expect to give? Like, what's reasonable in terms of service to their field?
I think you have to be a part of it, and just like National Council of Teachers of English, for example, I was willing to give my time looking at the history of the council,
Mhm.
looking at the women's groups, but I also gave my time speaking
Mhm.
about my research. And all of this was volunteer work, or I would go into the schools oftentimes or
Mhm.
work on resolutions for the council. So
Mhm.
you've got to give back as much as you give. I know another group I serve on here now is the Texas Women Faculty. I'm on their board in higher education. And we just had a conference last week, and it was a Zoom conference.
Oh, wow.
And why do we do a Zoom? We did it because we know that there are so many women that don't have the money to go to
Mm.
conferences, that we thought that we could reach out to women who would be able to come if it were on Zoom. And
Mhm.
I think we did that. I think we accomplished our goal. There are just many different things that women are doing. So
Mhm.
anytime we can get any help or reach out, I think it's fabulous.
So, how would you describe your legacy as a pioneering woman university administrator and professor?
Well, I just hope that they say she worked really hard and she cared about people. Somebody said to me the other day, "What do you want to see on your tombstone?" I said, "Oh my goodness, I don't know." I said, the typical wife, mother, educator kind of thing, or
Mhm.
just she cared about people, and I think that when we're in teaching, we have to sometimes pause and think about we are here for the students, primarily for the students. And sometimes if there's great controversy in a meeting and people are having trouble getting it together, you could just put up your hand and say, how does any of this advance the needs of the students? And wow, it doesn't? Well, what are we doing?
Yeah, in the conversation.
Given the conversation. And I think that for me, if someone says she was a good listener, because it's a hard thing to learn to listen, and you have to be willing to do that in order to learn about where you need to go.
There you go.
Sometimes I have to remind myself, you have to listen, and be patient. That patience is something that people can help me with. I don't know if I could ever say she was a very patient person.
Yeah, that one's not going on my tombstone.
No. But legacy, I just think that the greatest legacy I have now are those doctoral students who are out there. I had one just last week who is teaching at the university level, and she just won the Teacher of the Year award. And so that made me feel so good. She was one of the first doctoral students I had, and wasn't quite sure she was gonna make it. Something that I am most proud of, all of my doctoral students finished.
That is awesome. Man. What advice do you have for new administrators?
I think you really have to get to know, you should know before you accept a position what your position is going to entail. And you need to know who your players are. And I think it takes at least a year to really come to know a college, a school, a department, and you have to be willing to give it time.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you do nothing in the meantime, but you've got to listen to what people think, how they feel about things, and figure out what's going to work according to what you have to do, what you know you have to do, and according to what they see that they want to do. And, as a new administrator, you're going to see that you have maybe opportunities for hiring. Hiring is your most important, very, very important who you hire, because it's during that hiring process that you can fill the gaps, maybe. But you also have to think about who's there and who's in positions that they don't need to be in. And how else can you use them? Where else might they find happiness in their work? And so it's just I would say a good year of coming to know who you have. And then thinking about what, during that time, what you need, where you're going to need to fill gaps, and what it's going to take to get there. And that's a struggle. So it's a busy, busy life. I also think to allow yourself time for personal growth. Don't ever stop growing personally as well as professionally. You have to say, okay, what can I do? What works and what doesn't work?
Yeah.
Never stop questioning and reflecting.
Right.
You remember, Catherine, reflection wasn't always considered much of a form of research.
Right.
And maybe within the past 10 years, it's been really looked at much more favorably than it ever was.
Yeah, in principal education, we started building it in, 20 years ago. We started building in a reflective practice.
And I think it's one of the most important ways of looking at how we're living. I just think it's how do we help others wherever we are?
Yeah.
And help ourselves. No, I just don't think we should stay in any position or field if we're not happy in it. And sometimes that's easy to say and hard to do. I understand that. But, we can make changes. I mean, I make changes every day.
Dr. Jeanne Gerlach, it has been a true pleasure having you as my guest. Thank you for sharing today.
It's my pleasure.
To learn more about Dr. Gerlach's work, Leadership Women and Texas Women in Higher Education, see the links in our show notes. I'm so excited you're here, and remember, you're not alone on your career journey. Together, we can share our stories, move boldly into that perfect job, and we can light the path for our future fearless careerists. I'm Catherine Robert, and I can't wait to hear your story.
Fearless Careerist is available on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. Subscribe there or visit us at CatherineRobertEDD.com.